Hey everybody, welcome to our webinar, The Art and Science of Learning That Sticks, where we're going to present to you Grovo's microlearning method. Thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Alex Kurgan. I'm the Director of Learning at Grovo, and we've spent the last 7 years working on and refining our microlearning method and technology. And it's been a painstaking process. I've lived through it with the team these last 7 years. And, you know, we started out as 5 people in a small room, and last year we were named by Forbes as the #2 best mid-sized company to work for in the U.S. and the #24 company culture by Entrepreneur Magazine. And we partner with organizations all over the world to design microlearning programs that help people perform at their best and keep businesses ahead of a fast-changing world. And today I'm proud to give you a deep look into what we've learned. So if you've got tight turnaround times, you have a shoestring budget, if you have a small team, but you're still committed to delivering high-quality learning experiences, then this webinar is definitely for you. And if you're luxuriating in a big L&D budget and team, let me first congratulate you. And I want you to know that this method should help you more efficiently drive behavior change and prove out the value of your function. So I'd like to take a poll right now and kind of get our temperature of the participants. So this poll is about to what extent you already use microlearning in your practice. So we'll see another example of this kind of survey later on for tracking microlearning results. This is a Likert scale, a reduced one. We have a lot of answers coming in. Give it another 5 seconds or so. All right, let's share the results. So we see here that we have a pretty broad range of experience in the room. Hopefully everyone walks away with a lot of value, but it seems the plurality of the people here have at least some experience with microlearning, would perhaps like to do more of it, or learn specifically how to inject more of a microlearning approach into other programs. So that's the topic of this webinar, thankfully. I'd like to start, before we get into the nitty-gritty details, with this quote by Ray Stata: "The rate at which an organization learns may become the only sustainable source of competitive advantage." Ray wrote this in MIT Sloan Management Review in 1989. And in other words, if your rate of learning isn't equal to the rate of change, you will fall behind. And these two things, learning and change, are more difficult to keep in equilibrium than ever because we live in a world that's changing faster than ever, right? We all know the internet continues to transform the way we work and learn. People have been saying this for 20 years. It continues to be true. 100-year-old brands are being upset by 5-year-old startups. We as individuals have a constant stream of new technologies, new processes and trends to keep up with. People need to constantly reskill or risk becoming obsolete. And according to Deloitte, nearly every CEO and CHRO reports that their companies are not developing skills fast enough. And people are leaving and going elsewhere as a result. So we are falling behind, and top HR departments are recognizing that. They're recognizing that we must look at how much time it takes us to adapt to change. How much time does it take us, folks in the room, to create or curate the right learning experience, assign it out, then get learners to consume it, and then apply it. The only thing worse than not being prepared for something new is spending a lot of time to get prepared only to see the requirements change again. And that's the experience we often have. So in these fast-moving times, companies need a quicker, more agile, more effective way of getting employees up to speed and continuously learning on the job in order to keep pace with change and not fall behind. And that's where microlearning comes in. So we've written a book on how to create effective microlearning, which we will send out to you folks after the webinar. But right now we're going to do something a little bit more collaborative. The book is self-paced. You'll have it on your own time. But for now, get your questions ready, get your practical examples ready, and let's tackle some real organizational challenges through this microlearning approach today. So what is microlearning? Simply put, microlearning is learning in short, focused bursts. And there are other definitions that I'm sure you've seen before, but I like this one because it's simple, and it also helps us get out from under a big common misconception that a lot of folks have about microlearning, which is that microlearning means delivering content to employees in small bite-sized chunks. Because what happens then, if you think about it that way, is that microlearning boils down just to micro content. And it sounds like that makes sense, but if you do this, the outcome you get is content delivery or information transfer. But what we've learned the hard way from 7 years of doing this is that you can't just chop up content and call it microlearning and expect change. You need to provide the right kind of learning experience. So hence the definition here focuses on learning and not content. So what does microlearning look like? You folks have had some experience. Perhaps you've tried out microlearning in all of these different variations. It can mean e-learning on a laptop. It can mean mobile learning on a phone. It can mean learning by a more traditional format, like a workshop or a coaching session, or even a lecture, as long as that format is delivered in short, focused bursts, as long as there's learning happening in short, focused bursts. And that's possible with some of our more traditional formats if we are committed to make a change. Now, these bursts may last for a few seconds in some cases, up to a few minutes, and you can string them together as long as they're divided up with some practice and application. You don't want to have a bunch of bursts all in a row, because that's basically the same as just one long chunk of content, right? Now, as I mentioned, what we've learned is that you can't just choose a format, chop up some content, expect people to learn. There's an art and science to effective microlearning. So that's what you're going to learn today. And let's take a broader look at the art and the science part before we jump into the details. So the art of microlearning, it has to do with the fact that time and attention are both limited resources. And we all feel that. And we've all had issues as workplace learning professionals. I would assume every one of us has had some challenges engaging people and keeping people's attention. So how do you engage people in this age of distractibility? How do you not only get someone's attention, but also keep it? How do you make people feel like they're not being forced to do training? So the art of microlearning involves navigating the complexities of learner expectations in this increasingly digital world. Consider these numbers. Per Deloitte's report on the modern learner, today's employees have about 1% of their time, or roughly 24 minutes a week, to devote to learning. So they don't have much time to learn. They also don't have much attention to spare, at least not for you, to you per se, because in an age of distraction, people are checking their phones about 150 times per day. And not only do you need to capture their attention, but then you need to keep it. And we know the average knowledge worker switches tabs every 59 seconds from some research done by the informatics department at UC Irvine. And so we have all of these challenges in front of us in this age of distraction. But it's not all bad news, because the art is, as workplace learning professionals, we can ride this wave of immediate gratification. We can harness this energy and expectation that people have to consume short bits of content and replace some of those social media sessions and other distracting things that people do with really good short learning experiences. And we must be there at the point of need. So that's the art of it, right? We're going to match how people consume modern media. The science of microlearning has to do with how we learn best. When we learn, our brains grow and change, and this process takes time. So event-based mass instruction is the wrong starting point for us, especially for skills that take deliberate practice to get right. So we can't take long lectures and things like that as our starting point. But even for declarative memories, things like knowledge and facts, those are best built up in bursts over time. And let's take a look at why. So imagine this is what it looks like inside your brain. The tabletop here, it represents your working memory, which is a kind of temporary storage for information. And I actually highly recommend thinking about memory in this analogy, and perhaps telling some of your stakeholders or learners about it for them to have more buy-in into why microlearning is the right approach in terms of learning science. So the tabletop here represents your working memory, which is a kind of temporary storage for information, right? In other words, it's stuff that's actively on your mind right now. And the space there is limited, right? We can only fit a certain number of thoughts or papers, let's say, on this desktop. And as we keep adding them, they start falling over the edge. And anything that goes over the edge, it's going to get swept up by the custodian. It's going to be lost forever. Now, the drawer in the desk it represents your short-term memory. And this is a bigger space than the desktop, but it's not huge, right? And once something gets into short-term memory, it's less vulnerable to disruption, right? The custodian doesn't throw away papers once they're inside your desk, right? Finally, long-term memories are those that you can recall days, months, or years after they were originally stored. And these are the kinds that we want people to learn, the only kind that are really truly useful for us, right? And long-term memory is huge. It's nearly infinite. And to get things into long-term memory, we need to connect them to what we already know. And this process takes time. So let's recap in non-metaphorical terms. The problem with most learning experiences is that they're a stream of endless information which quickly overloads working memory, this desktop, which is really limited. You can only fit about 7 ± 2 items in your mind at one time, and only for a few seconds, maybe a minute, right? That's why within about 30 minutes of most learning events, you would expect almost all of it to be gone due to cognitive overload, right? And unfortunately, most learning events don't give people time to process and think. And so information just stays in working memory. It never consolidates into a resilient memory. It never makes its way into long-term memory. So the best learning experiences are those that give you a little bit at a time and then give you time to process, think, and digest so that you can connect what you just learned to what you already know. So in the spirit of that, let's take a little breather here. Let's take time to process, think, and digest, right? Math instruction just keeps streaming information at you, never giving you a chance to connect the dots in your brain, so we want to take a micro approach if possible. And before we go into the microlearning method and talk about the three steps here, the 3 parts of setting a strategy, then creating engaging content and experiences, and launching a campaign, let's take a pause. And I'd like you to write out in the questions panel, what is your most burning question about microlearning that you haven't heard a good answer to? Or perhaps a new one that's come up recently as you've tried to implement microlearning in your organization and it's been itching at you. So write out a question that you have about microlearning, send it into the chat, into the questions panel, and ideally I'm going to answer all of them as we go through the webinar. And if not, I'll point out to sections of the book that are relevant. So far we've gotten a good background. We've hopefully gotten buy-in around the idea that due to the fact that attention and time are especially limited resources today, and our brains learn best in bursts, microlearning is a good place to start for a learning strategy. And now we're getting some questions. What channels can I use to deliver microlearning? How do I design it? That we'll be getting into that in part 2. How do we get buy-in from stakeholders who are used to LMS online courses? We'll get into that in part 1. Thank you for that. What's the appropriate time frame for microlearning? 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We talk about that a little bit. I'll give you a sneak and say that a single micro lesson we found is really successful if it's in the 5 to 10 minute range, especially if you vary up the media. That's not 5 to 10 minutes of straight video, right? It's you're varying things up for people so that they're seeing things, they're practicing, etc. How do you gauge audiences in different time zones internationally? So this is a question I would say isn't specific to microlearning, but I'll tell you that our platform, we are focusing on international compatibility early next year. But before I make our Director of Product sweat, let's continue now to our method, where we're going to lay out the parts and hopefully answer some of these specific questions. And if you didn't get your question answered yet, keep it in mind, ask it again as we go through these parts. So, setting a microlearning strategy. We want to create a strategy or a microlearning brief to make a business case for microlearning, especially for folks who might be alarmed, right? Who are saying, well, we've never done this before. We have a serious approach to learning. Microlearning doesn't sound too serious. How do you get buy-in from those people, from those stakeholders? So we have to do this work so that we know what goes into each micro lesson and also put our stakeholders at ease that we are indeed solving business problems. So today companies spend over $140 billion on workplace learning, and yet only 37% feel their learning programs are effective. I saw that stat from a Burson report, and from a LinkedIn Learning report, I saw it as low as 8%. And why is that the case? So it's often because learning isn't tied to a specific business outcome. As L&D people, we get an order of learning, we get a training request, and then we rush to fill it. But to have a reliable effect on business outcomes, we need to dig into the problem. And especially to bear out a case for microlearning, we want to dig into the problem. So we want to use a strategy like, for example, the 5 whys technique to interview our stakeholders or even interrogate ourselves and just do this process for ourselves before committing to a particular learning initiative, right? So, for example, we have this exchange from our VP of product and or from your VP of product, let's say, and you, a workplace learning professional. VP of product tells you that he needs to build a course. He needs you to build a course on collaboration for the product team, and you ask why. Well, the product team is not really working well together, right? You didn't say okay and you start and go look for collaboration courses, right? You're digging deeper. The product team's not working well together. Why is that? Well, team members are not really satisfied with the end product and they're blaming one another. Okay, well, how come that's happening? Oh, it's because they're not really giving each other good feedback in the early going. Okay, well, why do you think that's happening? Because we have these team feedback sessions and some people feel uncomfortable criticizing others in public. And then you might say, okay, so maybe the learning objective we get down to, or behavioral objective, which we'll see in a second, is that product team members should be able to give one another critical feedback in team meetings, right? So obviously the process that you're going to go through is less robotic than this. You're not going to ask why, right? You might have a different questioning strategy. But having this kind of conversation helps you avoid the all too common trap of creating learning resources that don't get used or that fail to drive up a previously agreed upon business result. And whether you're doing microlearning or not, you're going to have this issue, right? So certainly we want to start here and get off on the right foot. Now, as I just alluded to, right, we're narrowing down. We want to get down to our micro lessons at the end. But what we want to focus on, our lessons on, is behaviors, right? Effective workplace learning doesn't just increase what employees know, it changes what they do, it transforms what they do. So once you're on the same page as the stakeholder, you want to translate each behavior, you want to translate each business problem that you've identified into a behavior or a set of behaviors, right? And almost any business problem comes down to behaviors. For example, let's translate a few. So if you recognize you have stagnant innovation in your organization, you might identify one behavior you want your managers to start exhibiting is to use design thinking to solve problems. If you have low employee engagement, you might get employees to play to their strengths every day. If you're losing big deals to competitors, you might train your salespeople to deliver more captivating presentations, right? Any one of these business problems really comes down to a behavior that you can realistically target with microlearning. And by tethering your programs to behaviors, if the behaviors change, if you can see that people are playing to their strengths, if people unbias the interview process, if they're using design thinking, these are things that you can see happening in the workplace. If the behaviors change, you can be pretty confident from then on that the business outcome will change as well, right? Managers who use design thinking work in innovative organizations, right? If you unbias the interview process, you will get better organizational diversity results, right? And when these things happen, you can tie the result directly to the learning initiative, which is great news for you. Now, the final part of setting a microlearning strategy before we start designing lessons is that we want to talk to our learners. We don't just want to design around the points that you or an SME might find important. We want to interview the audience first to learn why they succeed or fail at the target behaviors, right? This is what it means to really be learner first. So let's not get our SMEs involved first. Let's talk to our learners about the behaviors. And we ask them things like this. When do you succeed at this behavior? When do you fail? Do you ever avoid it? Were you even aware that you had to do this behavior? It was expected of you. Did anybody tell you that? What would make this behavior easier for you? These kinds of questions get people talking. The more examples, stories, and details you can gather, the better. And whether the behavior is something basic like filling out a timesheet or it's more complicated like creating a budget, the main idea is to collect these first-hand accounts of how your learners view a particular behavior so you can create micro lessons that directly address their needs and concerns. Now, one thing you can do with these answers, which we do at Grovo, is we bucket the learner answers into these 5 gaps that may exist. Now, we like to think of the pop star Kesha in terms of knowledge, environment, skills, habits, and attitudes. So we use this Kesha model to clarify what kind of learning experience we'll need to create to get learners from where they are now to where they need to be. So for instance, to close an attitude gap, right? So here we have an attitude gap. The learner, in terms of feedback, right? If that's the behavior that you care about, effective feedback, learner might say, I've never found critical feedback to be all that helpful, so I don't feel comfortable giving it, right? Someone might have that attitude. You might find that be prevalent across your team. So to close that gap, your micro lesson might include a moving story to help the learner see the behavior differently. To close a skills gap, right, you might include an extra helping of practice exercises. If somebody shuts down and gets defensive when somebody gives them feedback, you can teach that person, that the feedback giver, through practice exercises, how to close that skills gap. The point is that the only way to create microlearning experiences that resonate is to speak with the learners firsthand. So let's look at a case study of this. One Grovo customer that applied this strategy that we've laid out of investigating the problem, identifying target behaviors, then interviewing learners prior to creating microlearning was IHG, which owns brands like Holiday Inn and Crown Royal. And IHG had a business problem. It was a customer support problem. The incoming service requests they were getting from guests were getting really complicated. And they required a lot of knowledge and creativity and communication from the representatives to be able to solve. So the behavior that we focused on was for representatives to be able to use the company's new brand voice and tone to efficiently handle customer requests. And we focused on behaviors or micro behaviors, which we'll learn more about shortly. So for example, instead of simply telling reps to sound warm and friendly on the phone, we train them to smile on calls, explaining that customers can feel it or hear it on the other side. Instead of simply telling people to be patient with customers, we train them to breathe regularly so that they sound less tense, right? These are all behaviors that people have control over, as opposed to more subjective kind of like competencies, right? And so the result of this approach was that the customer service reps who participated in this program ended up resolving customer issues a lot faster than ever. They cut onboarding time from 5 weeks to 3 weeks. And the L&D team at IHG won a Gold Stevie Award for Customer Service Training Product of the Year. So their business problem was, it started out as this big problem. It was related to customer service and what do you do there? So they focused on a behavior, they sliced it down into micro behaviors and created microlearning experiences from there. So let's think about it all together. We know that we want to target a behavior and then micro behaviors with our microlearning experiences. So think of the business problem that you want to tackle and answer into the chat. What behaviors are you going to target this year? So you can enter one, you can enter multiple behaviors. Answer in the chat, and for extra credit, you can write the business challenge that you want to solve in parentheses. So for example, one behavior might be to give effective feedback, right? And the business challenge you're trying to solve is, young and inexperienced managers, and you want them to give effective feedback, right? Or pitching a new idea. Let's see some of these. So Michelle writes in to give effective coaching, right? Effective coaching is certainly behavior. It's a big one. You definitely want to slice that one up. Memory retention for call center agents. So helping people learn and remember better. It's like a kind of meta learning behavior, but it certainly counts. Two-way feedback. Absolutely. So someone has a business challenge of team collaboration. So one behavior might be to use a design thinking process, or to use like the Google design workshop process to get people to collaborate, right? That's a very specific behavior. Build collaborative relationships, develop business acumen, right? So something like develop business acumen, that's a really I would call that more of a business challenge than a specific behavior that you can then break down into more specific actions that people are providing. Right? These are all great. Thank you, everybody who's submitting these. Write these out, even if you haven't submitted it. We're going to do something with them throughout the presentation. So now that you have a behavior that you're targeting, let's make sure everyone has one written down, even if you're not answering in the questions. we're going to see how we can translate that into some microlearning as we go on. So once we know what behaviors we're targeting, we've interviewed our learners, we know what their gaps are and what their concerns are, we are ready to start creating engaging microlearning experiences and content. And the first step is to scope out what we call a microlearning track. Now, a microlearning track is a collection of short, punchy lessons that together will help a learner perform a specific behavior. And by the way, let me just say a few of you were asking if we will have these slides available to you after the fact. Absolutely, we'll have a full recording. And remember, we also have a book with all kinds of really great details of how to create effective microlearning experiences coming for you as well. So we are creating a track. That's kind of like the scaffolding that goes up before we build the building. And it's important to define what needs to be included in the track before we dive headfirst into the world of content, so that we're not indulging the temptation to include more information than is necessary, right? So here's how we do it. We break our behaviors down into micro behaviors, as I've been alluding to. So we're using the insights that we gained from the learner interviews, and we're breaking those down into component parts that can each be learned and practiced independently. So for example, a few of you mentioned feedback, right? So how do you help somebody learn the behavior of feedback? Well, one thing you can do is break it down into these subcomponents, these micro behaviors. So feedback is really a process of these three smaller actions where you prepare to give feedback. You, for example, check in with the person with their body language. You choose the right venue. You might ask them beforehand, hey, can I share some feedback with you to get buy-in? All of that goes into preparation, and you can think about those things and practice them separately. Another micro behavior in feedback is to use the situation behavior impact model to give clear feedback. So for example, hey, last Friday I noticed that you kind of rolled your eyes when Charlotte was presenting, and it made her feel like you weren't appreciating the work that she had put in. Right? So there you describe the situation, a specific behavior, and an impact, and that's a very specific micro behavior that you can get people to practice separately from the follow-up part. The follow-up part is a third micro behavior that you can get people to come up with solutions together rather than making feedback just a single problem. Right? Here, let's take a look at another example. Right? Here's one way of getting to micro behaviors from the learner interviews that you did before. So let's say you have this big business problem where you're trying to have a remote workforce, but you're running into productivity issues, right? And anyone who's tried out a remote workforce is going to run into some version of this issue, right? So we figure the target behavior here is to be as productive in a remote environment as in the office, right? That makes the problem a specific action that people can start working on. And now we can look at our learner pain points and what people mention in interviews and try to identify micro behaviors that would make great lessons. So for example, if somebody says, you know, how can I prove that I'm participating and still accountable? Somebody mentions that in their interview. You might have a lesson on updating tasks in Basecamp at the end of each workday, because that micro behavior directly addresses that concern. Right? Someone says, I want to work remotely, but how do I handle distractions at home? You might teach that person, hey, here's how to set up a remote workspace that feels like an office. Right? So you can go directly from these learner pain points into micro behaviors that give you a much richer sense of the target behavior and lets you go in short focused bursts rather than all at once. Okay, great. So once we have a list of maybe 3 to 10 micro behaviors for any given behavior that we want to create experiences and resources around that are really accessible to people. Now we want to actually design out what that stuff looks like, right? In many ways, our micro lessons need to work harder than traditional learning experiences like lectures or workshops, because we only have a few minutes. We need to capture attention, we need to motivate action and make learning stick. We only have a few minutes, and that's kind of a tall order. So what we've learned in our experiments over the years is that most great micro lessons contain a few essential elements that make them effective. And like any good story or presentation, if you structure those elements well, your odds of making an impact dramatically increase. So here's an example of how this might work. Here's a a flow that you can use for teaching a microbehavior. Now, this works with any microbehavior. There are different structures that you can use. This one happens to be built into one of our lesson templates in our new Create tool. But we found a few different ones work. So, for example, here you can start for a given microbehavior. You can start out with an aha moment to get someone engaged and inspired to perform that microbehavior. Then state a clear central key message about it. Then you can teach the person how to perform the microbehavior with how-to steps along with examples. Then you get them to practice what they just learned, and you give them a call to action at the end, a really small action that now that they've learned for 5 to 10 minutes that they can go out into the real world and perform that action and apply it and start to build up a habit, start to build up that behavior. You can think about, there are other structures you can use. You can think about an expert, for example, giving a lesson that starts out, here's how I think about this microbehavior. Now let's walk through an example together. Now you try it with my feedback, and now go off on your own and do it. That's a similar kind of variation that focuses on an expert or a role model. And as I mentioned, our new authoring tool allows you to build lessons with this structure, which we're very excited about. And you'll see more examples of these in the book. But whatever kind of structure you choose, you want to include a lot of these elements to, again, engage people, capture and keep their attention. That's what aha moments do. That's what examples do. You actually make learning stick by giving people practice, and you can motivate action in a way as well through aha moments again, through calls to action, and so forth. So now that we have that design, that scaffolding fully realized, we know what microbehaviors we're targeting, and we know the general flow of how we're going to go through those microbehaviors, what examples we want to show, how the how-to steps, right? Once we know that, we want to now produce some multimedia around it. In general, it's a good idea to use multimedia even if you are someone who loves in-person training sessions. That's not a problem. Live stuff is great. You want to have at least some multimedia because you want things to be self-paced for the learner, right? If you have an in-person session, it's very difficult in many cases to make it self-paced. So we want to have at least some media. And in general, it's good to use multimedia and to vary the formats you use, because learners pay more attention when a format changes. And we learn this, we used to create almost entirely just videos. And we learned that if you're watching a video, you quickly get used to the format. So you pay less attention, especially if there are a lot of videos in a row. So with the kind of variety that we recommend, you might see a short video that's followed by a question about the video, followed by a GIF with text, etc., right? Every change primes attention. And we go into detail in the book about when you might use video, audio, or text, or GIFs, and other formats in your lessons. I want to show you a couple of examples of how even an image like this can be used in a lesson to engage learners. So this is the cover image of a sales lesson on giving an excellent demo. And you can see this lesson is focused on the micro behavior of how to start the demo, what to do at the beginning of the demo. Right? Giving an excellent demo is the larger behavior. Starting the demo the right way is the micro behavior. And this is the cover for the lesson. It evokes some imagery. Then there's a video later on that shows the stars aligning and so forth. That gives people an aha moment about what they can do with the start of the demo. Here's a still. Also, this image on the left is actually a GIF, and the person is writing out the first step of an agenda. Right, so GIFs and videos are great for showing an example, allowing learners to model their behavior off of someone, right, off of a visual example. Text is a great old standard, especially for just giving people prompts for what to do right now. And we go into a lot of detail in the book as to how to create some of these media formats. In a microlearning experience, and we have this useful list of tools and resources for creating some of this micromedia. So, QuickTime and Camtasia are great for recording. We love, for example, Unsplash. Definitely check out unsplash.com. It's a beautiful stock photography, and I believe I used Unsplash to make most of the imagery in this presentation. Outside of the stuff that's on Grovo, almost all of it is from Unsplash. and we use it in lessons all the time. Giphy is great for finding GIFs, etc. So these are all great tools and resources. There are others, so definitely give them a try, and again, you'll see more of these in the book. So let's take a pause here and consider. So we've gone through the first two parts. So in the first part, we set ourselves a strategy, and we picked a target behavior that we want to focus on that's going to address a particular business outcome, right? Now what we've learned is that once we have that behavior, we want to break it down into micro behaviors. Then we're going to design micro lessons in a particular flow, right? We want to have aha moments and examples and how-to and practice and call to action built into that micro lesson, even if it's part of a longer in-person session. And we want to produce multimedia if possible to take advantage of the self-paced aspects of putting media in the hands of people, and also into the attention-getting aspects of using different formats to continually capture people's attention. So I'd like you to think about it. Given the target behavior that you chose already, how would you begin your micro lesson? So, for example, would you begin with a video that tells a story about how important it is to give feedback? Would you start with a provocative question? It could just be text. So enter into the questions field. How would you start your micro lesson? What would you do? What media would you use, or what aspect of storytelling would you use to start your micro lesson? So Lana says she would begin with a provocative question. She likes that. So that really could just be text. For example, if you had text, I remember from one lesson, I'm gonna try to recall, there was something about how, like, it was a question about the mayor of San Antonio, and he did all of these things in 1 year. How much was he paid? And the answer was $3,000 a year or something like that. And it was meant to create an aha moment about a purpose that one can draw from their work. And before just getting into that, we had a story, a provocative question or scenario that got people thinking about it, right? Combined video with text, a fun video, it says Druti, Randy, a fun video to engage the learner, absolutely. And just start thinking, not just with the format, but start thinking, given the behavior that you care about, right? What is that first thing that you want people to see? How are you going to get them to care about it? How are you going to get them to have that aha moment? And again, you'll learn more about that in the book. Okay, excellent. So once we've designed out and developed multimedia materials, we have our learning experiences set. We can't just put it out there. We need to be careful about getting people to engage. And so we want to treat our microlearning experiences like a campaign. We want to borrow this term from marketing or politics. It should feel exciting to partake in that. Well, maybe it's exciting to participate in a marketing campaign. I feel like everyone's tired of political campaigns by now. So let's think about marketing campaign, right? A campaign is a way of delivering a series of microlearning lessons over the course of a few days or a few weeks. And we want to start out by thinking about the point of need, because at any given time, people are not that motivated to learn. So rather than struggle to motivate people, we can cheat, and we can be there when they're already motivated. You can do this by delivering learning at the point of need, the moment when a learner needs to apply a skill or behavior in real life. That's when your learners are happy to take all the help that they can get. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the point of need and why microlearning fits in perfectly with that. So think about it like this. Let's say I have let's take a look at this chart, and let's think about the point of need as being a presentation that I have to give. Imagine I have a presentation to give in a year. A year ahead of now, I would have to do so much training to prepare for this presentation. If I, let's say, started preparing in 2 weeks, within a few weeks, I probably would have forgotten what I learned, so I have to prepare again and again and again and again. So I have to do a lot of training. Now, if my presentation is tomorrow, there might not be a lot that I need to learn, because I can just cram a lot, right? That's not good learning, but it reduces the amount of time, the amount of training that I need to do. At the same time, the closer we are to the point of need, the more motivated I am to learn. So what we want to do is try to get to a sweet spot where we're close to the point of need, but far enough away where people still have time to train, where they're not just frantically Googling things, right? So that's the sweet spot of our microlearning experience. We want to be there at the point of need with maybe a resource, a cheat sheet, some performance support, but we want to also be there a couple of days in advance, a couple of weeks in advance perhaps, at this sweet spot when people still have time to learn. So let's take a look at some of these points of need in your organization. A point of need can be either organic or artificial. That's the beauty of these things. These things can already be happening, or you can create them. For example, someone's current work, right? If they currently have a project to do and they've never managed a project before, right? That can already be happening, or you can assign someone a project. That's a point of need where someone is all of a sudden super motivated to learn. An upcoming performance, right? If you have a presentation coming up, a new role or expectation, as soon as somebody becomes a manager, as soon as someone joins your organization, that day, they should be receiving some learning experience, because that's when they're most vulnerable, and microlearning makes it possible because it's short enough to get into the motivational window that's created by this point of need. A company-wide initiative, a pressing problem. For example, we just heard from Envoy Air, a really interesting story. So two of their employees were having major conflict on the ramp at DFW Airport, and apparently their manager immediately logged into Grovo from his phone and searched conflict resolution, found the exact learning experience he was looking for. A few minutes later, he called them aside, put into practice the techniques he just learned, and the problem was solved. Now that's really cutting it close. That's really close to the point of need, right? If it was potentially a less pressing conflict, right, he would have had maybe a day to learn and digest before he got to practice. But in any case, any one of these moments that happen at all kinds of points across the employee life cycle and all kinds of points across the day are great opportunities to put learning experiences. And you want to tether things to those moments. Otherwise, your learning just kind of arrives flat, right? It doesn't mean anything to anyone because they have other things on their mind. So you have to be there at the point of need. Now, another thing that you can do to create a feeling of excitement and engagement, right, besides being there when people are already motivated, is to launch with fanfare, to think like a marketer, right? So let your learners know what's coming and why they should care across multiple channels. So don't just let your training arrive quietly, right? Make it a big deal. And create company-wide excitement. Something that makes training feel as if it's not just something that people are doing to check a box. It's something that everybody's aware of, excited to do. People feel social pressure around it. And it kind of forces people to pay attention at the top of the funnel, because after all, there's nothing, if you can't get people's attention at the top of the funnel, then no matter how good your learning experience is, it's not going to do anything, right? Because so many people are never going to see it. So some things that we like to do, here are examples of some promotional email drips, images from promotional email drips that we sent out, informing learners of upcoming microlearning programs. We've created teaser trailers before to get people excited about new learning initiatives, which a few of you mentioned as well, that kind of talk about the benefits or maybe show what some of the learning experience might be like. We've helped people hang posters around the office, right? That's always great because learners are in the office, they see these posters, they get excited. You can contact people on Slack at an all-hands meeting, right? You're using all of these different channels and all of these different tactics to generate as much awareness and interest as possible for your learning programs, right? As I said, it's simple math. The more people you get in through the door, the greater impact that the program is going to have on the organization overall. And the last thing we want to do and think about in terms of the campaign and spacing it out, right, is how do we make learning stick over the course of the campaign, right? So creating short and focused lessons that run approximately 5 to 10 minutes, right, as I said, each micro lesson that goes through aha moment example, etc., 5 to 10 minutes, right? That's a great way to capture and keep attention. And the practice is a great way to help make learning stick, but you have to take additional steps to fight forgetting. Because typically learning events are forgetting events. When we learn something once, our skills and knowledge decay soon after. So we need to offer learners spaced reinforcement to fight forgetting. And luckily, microlearning allows you to do this easily, right? With typical mass instruction, it's unclear what to even space. You have such big chunks, right? How do you repeatedly space a 1-hour lecture? It's much easier to space a short lesson or a short practice exercise from that micro lesson. So here's an example of how this might look like over the course of a week, right? So for example, you might learn this new micro behavior, right? So let's say you're going through feedback. So you start by learning how to get someone's buy-in around giving feedback, how to prepare to give feedback. And you practice that a little bit, and then you preview the next micro behavior, which is the next part of giving feedback. Then the next day, you review what you learned the first day. That gives you some spacing, some space reinforcement, and then you learn the next micro behavior, and then you practice that. Then you preview the next behavior. Then on Wednesday, you do the same thing. Thursday, you do the same thing. As you gradually learn new micro behaviors, and on Friday at the end, you're ready to perform, because the next week you're actually ready to do it, right? So this might be a sample week. Imagine if someone has an interview coming up and they've never interviewed someone before. Rather than giving them interview training at some random point throughout the year, you give them interview training 1 week before their first interview, and the training says, hey, get ready for your interview. There's 5 to 10 minutes every single day that's going to get you ready to have an excellent interview, and I guarantee you that the way that your learner will think about and interact with that program is totally different than a typical training event. And look at what happens in just 25 minutes. You have 15 spaced learning moments, right? Because you have the reviews and the previews, not to mention all of the benefit that happens in between these days. The reflection, the conversation, the sleep, right? Sleep is really valuable for consolidating memories, right? And now the next week, as I said, that person might actually perform, and then maybe go back and based on how they did, go back to some of the micro lessons for reinforcement, or they might start combining these micro behaviors, start practicing them together, right? So we just learned about the importance of launching a microlearning campaign in the right way across time, right? We want to find the right point of need for our organizations, some current work, some upcoming performance, company-wide initiative, right? More specifically, you can think about onboarding, promotions, first-time hiring managers, performance reviews, new boss. These are all points of need. So given the behavior that you want to target, right, and the audience for that, what is your point of need? And if you can't think of one, come up with a new one, right? How are you going to create a new point of need? So enter into the questions panel. What is the point of need for your upcoming microlearning campaign? So TJ asked, have we ever deployed microlearning for an entire new hire training curriculum? Absolutely, right? So that's an example where onboarding is the point of need, and a microlearning experience which we've done with many different folks. You could see more about that on the Grovo website and some of our case studies. Onboarding is certainly a point of need for microlearning. What else? Robin says performance reviews, right? Perfect. So salary planning, right? Salary planning is the behavior that you want to get people to execute successfully. Performance reviews is a perfect time to do that. Or if salary planning is the point of need, and that happens at a predetermined part of the year, that's a perfect time to do training around that. A new product launch, right? New product launch. Everyone is as Rebecca, I believe, mentioned, everyone is super excited for this new product. Now is the time to teach people how to demo the right way, let's say, right? Our institution is going through constant change, says Brittany, so implementing change effectively on ensuring a great employee experience. Absolutely, right? If change is already the status quo in your organization, you can just tether things to those moments of change. Let's take one couple others. Lindsay mentioned a cybersecurity attack. Absolutely, that could come at any time, right? So perhaps instead of waiting for your own organization to have a cybersecurity attack, you can create a new point of need and capitalize on the news, right? So a few weeks ago, right, there was that enormous security breach, the WannaCry virus or something like that. It was all over the news. You could use news stories like that to create a point of need in the organization for new security training, right? All of these things are great. Strategic planning, offsite meeting, Judy, these are all awesome. Okay, so it seems like we have a good grasp around the point of need. We're gonna put our microlearning experience there. We're gonna surround that moment of need with great experiences and resources, and we're going to do that with fanfare, making sure everybody is aware of it, and we're going to do it over time to make sure that learning sticks. Excellent. So to this point, we've set our strategy, we've created our content and experiences, and we've launched a campaign. Now we want to track learner progress. We want to see that we actually, what we're doing has any kind of impact at all. And that's what we want to get with microlearning. That's the whole point of it, right? How do we really efficiently, without too much time, without too much money, create experiences that have an impact on the business? So there are a couple of things you can do. These are some options. There are other options listed out in the book, and certainly as we get more and more inventive with how we track and determine that change is happening, there will be more to talk about. But let's focus on these few. So first, you can set milestones or help learners set milestones. So milestones are these learning achievements. They're small enough to be measurable. They're large enough to be meaningful. And milestones with clear timelines, they focus our energy. So for example, a milestone for somebody learning to be efficient with email, right? If that's the behavior, it might be getting to inbox 0. So how do you know if somebody's doing that behavior? Well, they reach that milestone. They get to inbox 0. How do you know that a salesperson is indeed learning the spin selling technique and exhibiting that behavior? Well, have they closed a $50,000 deal using that technique? How can you tell whether an engineer is learning a new coding language, right? You know, usually we don't know. We're wondering about ROI. Well, you can set a milestone. Hey, we want this engineer to deploy 10 lines of this code in every day this week, right? So that can be a milestone. And again, they're small enough to be measurable. You can tell when they happen or not, and they're a great way of tracking that change is happening, that learning is being transferred to the real world, right? You can see, for example, the number of milestones that an individual has achieved tells you about their individual progress. You can say the percent of individuals across your organization who have achieved a specific milestone, like the percent of all of your managers who have delegated a task to one of their direct reports. What percentage is that? You can track things like that as well. Secondly, you can give people performance rubrics. So this is a little bit less hands-on. If you wanted to allow people to do more of the tracking on their own, right, you can give them performance rubrics that they can use to evaluate themselves, like a checklist, for example, right? After I did my presentation or after I had my one-on-one meeting, I look at the checklist. Did I do this? Did I do X? Did I do Y? Did I do Z? Did I exhibit this micro behavior? Did I do this, right? And this is a very quick and helpful way to tell clearly how I am performing as a learner and what I need to focus on next to improve. We can also think about another less technical way of tracking progress, which is to involve role models in giving feedback to our learners. Not random people, this should be role models, right? If somebody's learning to play the piano and their mom tells them it sounds good, right, that's not worth much, right? So likewise, we want to focus our feedback on people who exceed the skills of the learner. So if you're getting people to give better feedback or to learn a particular negotiation technique or what have you, whatever behavior it is, feedback from role models is a great way of learners individually tracking progress. But let's talk about a more formal way, which is I think what most of you folks might have in mind when we talk about tracking progress. So you can use tests and surveys like a Likert scale to measure change or to course correct or celebrate progress. So for example, you could, if you're focusing on the behavior or giving feedback, you can have a survey that includes the question, how frequently do you do each of the following? So I ask for permission before I give someone feedback. Never, sometimes, most of the time, almost always, I'm not sure what this means. So you can ask someone this question and a few other questions specific to micro behaviors around feedback, then see what the baseline is across the organization, then administer the learning experience and get the results and see what the difference is, the uptick, ideally uptick is in micro behaviors. If there is no uptick, you can be confident that your learning experience didn't really work, and that's not a problem. You can go back to the drawing board a little bit, but you'll at least know what parts of it might not be working so well. Here we have some results from a Likert survey that we ran internally. We had an internal one-week program at Grovo to help our managers run better one-on-ones, and we surveyed them before the training and then a few weeks after, and this is what we found. So, for example, around the larger behavior of having weekly one-on-one meetings, we already were doing this really well. We went from 95% to 100%. But look at something like, do you give feedback at the end of your one-on-ones, right? Only 62% of our managers said that they were doing it most of the time or almost always. And there was a similar reporting from the recipients of the one-on-one, the direct reports, right? But then after the training, that micro behavior increased in terms of its frequency, and so we saw this change across the organization, right? And it was interesting to the learners and to the business. Now, regardless of what tracking method you choose, note that measurement method itself is its own little learning trigger. So when people get measured or tested, they might learn from the test itself, or they're going to be spurred to course correct and potentially dive into more microlearning. So measurement is a great strategy. So let's talk next steps. We have a book, as I mentioned, coming to all of you folks just for participating in the webinar. You're going to get an email that walks through our method in much more depth. It gives you a worksheet and other kinds of nifty resources to help you actually bring this stuff to life. I'm going to take some questions right now. Before I do that, I'd like to prompt all of you to connect with me. Please follow me on Twitter at LearnandKurgan. You can also email me. I love to have conversations about all of this stuff, especially when it gets into the practical details. You can email me at alex@grovo.com or alternately at microlearning@grovo.com. Again, we'll see how we can bring microlearning to bear on practical problems. It's something that I do all the time internally at Grovo in our own internal learning programs. I love to learn from practical examples. So please email me. I'd love to help. For now, let's go to the remaining questions, and please keep them coming. I'll be available at least for another few minutes until I've answered as many as I can and my voice runs out. So first question is from Elaine. She asked, do you believe all content, including complex skills, can be delivered using microlearning? Is there content that doesn't work with microlearning? I've been accused of being a microlearning purist. I am to some extent. I believe in workshops and things that get people practicing together. I think there are a lot of great social things that happen when people are together live. But in general, I always believe that no matter how complex the behavior, no matter what it is, it will always benefit from creating a layer of fundamentals for people, creating a mental model, mental representation through a few effective microlearning experiences that focus on micro-behaviors, right? If someone is thinking about, learning world history and they want to go, dive deep into all of the facts and all of that, microlearning might not be for them necessarily. But if somebody wants to do something and they're focused on a behavior, I certainly believe that microlearning is the foundation to start with. Ryan asks, what is the best way to discuss the curation of content for boards and directors that demand a specific curriculum? I would say, Ryan, that if the curriculum is mandatory, if you have a competency model that you have to map to, right, you can show how the microlearning experiences you're creating, how they map one-to-one to the behaviors that you're trying to influence. So you just need to get from the curriculum down to behaviors, which everyone should be able to get on board with, right? Any business person should be able to get on board with the idea that what you're trying to teach people is actions and behaviors. You're trying to transform people, not just inform them, right? So once you get down to the behavior level, you should be able to match and map microlearning experiences to those behaviors. Pam asks, are micro-content and microlearning different? If yes, how are they different? Technically speaking, we should refer to microlearning just as what happens for the learner. The learner is doing microlearning, right? They're learning a little bit at a time in short focused bursts. Micro-content, when it's effective, when it's effectively designed out and it has aha moments and has examples, it has practice, micro-content is the way to facilitate and drive micro-learning. Great micro-content creates a great experience, which drives micro-learning. Judy asks, some of our senior executives are convinced that multi-day live workshops are the way to go. How do we convince them that microlearning is a better approach? So that's a great question. There are a couple of ways to go. One thing you can do, Jody, is or Judy, is to start incorporating some micro elements into those longer workshops. So break up the longer multi-day workshops into multiple bursts of shorter micro behaviors where people learn a little bit at a time, then they practice it, collaborate together, then there's a break, then they do it again. Another thing you can do is simply A/B test, right, where you have some folks, or even just a small pilot group, go through the microlearning experience and compare the results and the cost of the microlearning experience to the multi-day live workshop experience. I'm sure you'll be able to see that the cost is a lot less, and ideally the results are just as good, if not better. Molly asks, is it better to push or have employees pull microlearning? That's a great question. It depends on your point of need. So I would say for something like onboarding or someone's a new manager, these are big employee life cycle things where it makes sense for HR and other formal functions to be more involved and push microlearning out, right? So as soon as somebody becomes a manager, they get this program from you, right? That makes sense. For other kinds of points of need that happen more throughout the day, a pull approach works even better. So for example, someone is wants to delegate responsibility to another coworker, but they're not sure how to. So that's more of a pull use case where it just pops up throughout the day, right? So I would say the things that are across the employee lifecycle, HR lifecycle type things, HRIS moments are better for push, and more daily learning kind of use cases work better with a pull functionality, but ideally you have both, right? Because both of those use cases and kinds of points of need sit side by side throughout an employee's career. Derek asks, interested in learning how to phrase questions to properly test transfer of knowledge. Derek, this is a great question. I would say that our focus is not on testing transfer of knowledge. It's on testing actual change. So we want to phrase questions around behaviors and whether people are how frequently they're doing it. So using a standard Likert scale frequency level of asking people, how frequently do you do this, or do you do this, right? Name the behavior. Do you ask for permission before giving feedback? Never. Sometimes. About half the time, almost always, etc. Asking that kind of frequency level, and doing it where you confirm indeed that the results are accurate by asking two different groups, right? By asking managers and their direct reports, etc. That's a great strategy. We have more about that in the book. I'm also coming out with a blog post about that and other measurement strategies. And then as far as questions within the lesson, I just recommend giving people real kind of challenges, scenarios. Putting people in the shoes of a real performer, saying, hey, if you had this scenario, what would you do? Or here's an example, what would you do next, etc. That's a great strategy. Ashley asks, what's the best practice for interviewing learners? How do companies that have 30,000 to 100,000 employees do this best? Well, that's a great question. And really, if you can identify even a handful, 3 to 5, even one learner that's going to be part of your target audience, that's going to give you a much better idea of what to focus on than if you just talked with subject matter experts. So just, if it's possible, do 5 interviews, and from there you will learn a ton about how to design the next step. So you don't have to worry about the 30,000 or 100,000. If you did want to get more voices, send out a survey, like a quick 5-question survey that people can do in their emails. That should certainly work. Aaron asks, what are your thoughts on mobile microlearning? Well, that's one of the format options that we mentioned. It's definitely great. A mobile option is especially good for things that happen out in the field, right? If someone is going into a presentation and they want to review the micro behaviors that they need to be focusing on in that presentation, a mobile experience is going to be really good for that. So thinking about the point of need and whether that point of need involves someone having their phone is a great way to determine what the format is. Brittany asks, have you had any experience with compliance or regulatory training in microlearning? Yes, I believe we have a use case of that up on the website. We tried as much as possible to make sexual harassment training engaging and fun and also effective while checking the box for compliance reasons. So absolutely, that's a use case. Tian asks, what is the most effective delivery method, PowerPoint, e-learning software? Well, I certainly recommend to look at the book to get a better sense of the media options. But I'll say that Grovo's authoring tool is expressly built for the kinds of multimedia variety and lesson flows that I described previously, and also for delivering that experience to learners. We have one more question from Druti, who asks, can microlearning succeed as a standalone program, or does it generally work better for reinforcement? So we found that a blended approach is great, where you, for example, have a live session that's focused on workshopping and practice and getting people just to do stuff, and then prior to that workshop, there's a microlearning experience, and then after that workshop, there's also a microlearning experience to reinforce. We've also found that microlearning programs that stand alone are also highly effective, but for things that require a lot of practice and workshopping and collaboration and role-playing, definitely that stuff can be complemented with microlearning and should happen live. But then what you do is you get all of the benefits of those things without also spending time on the fundamentals, teaching the fundamentals, which you should do through a microlearning approach. Ryan asks another question. It seems that there is a specific formula that you suggest. How would you respond to mandatory changes by HR boss, etc., after you carefully set up a quality microlearning experience? That is to say, how flexible is the microlearning format? So the experience is certainly flexible, and people are going to want to, maybe gradually change or say, oh, we only want to adopt parts of this approach. That's fine. What you should be able to see is the more that you adopt, the better the results will be, the more clear that it will be that this approach is the way to go in general. So, don't be put off initially if there's any kind of resistance or pushback that you get. Implement as much microlearning as you can, show the results, and you will ideally get more and more flexibility to take this kind of microlearning approach. Manuel asks, will you guys create a microlearning course for creating microlearning? Great question. The answer is yes. We're working on it right now. That's a no-brainer, right, Manuel? Yes, we will have that. We're starting out with the book, which is really great because it's self-paced, and we will graduate to a microlearning course. Brad asks, do you think that microlearning fits with training as well as development? I can see how it fits with developing new skills. What about a formal training program for a new employee? Absolutely. If you're thinking about training in terms of deliberately drilling and practicing a specific thing, I think a microlearning approach is great because it divides up that training over time. You get people to sleep and think and let their brains and bodies wire in their new skills, which takes time. Sometimes you'll be trying something and drilling it, and you just won't get it, and you'll sleep, and the next day you'll be able to do it. So taking a microlearning approach and splitting up training sessions into short bursts over time is excellent for training, especially new skills. Theodore asks, how do you get over non-exempt workers consuming microlearning and getting over the hurdle of paying said employee? I'm sorry, the question disappeared as I was answering it. So you know what? How about this? You email me that question, alex@grovo.com, and I will give you a really good answer to it. I apologize. The question disappeared as I was answering. Okay. Spencer asks, what's the best way to add participant engagement? So many different answers to this. I'd say that within the lesson itself, having a video at the very beginning that creates an aha moment that gets people excited. Grovo has a lot of examples of this in our own lessons. Is a great way to generate engagement. And the best answer always is just put stuff at the point of need. If you can get learning experiences to people when they already know they need them, then you have all of the engagement in the world. Ryan asks, how do you break the misconceptions of microlearning to stakeholders? Well, certainly you can send them parts of this presentation, some of the other assets that we have to help convince stakeholders of the great effects of microlearning. We actually have another ebook that we released previously that's more about kind of the business case behind microlearning. But I'll say my answer previously also still stands. Just start doing it, and people will see the results, and you'll get more and more leeway to do more of it. Bill asks, has Grovo worked in a fast-paced healthcare environment? Absolutely. That's one of our favorite use cases. I remember speaking to an L&D person from a hospital network in Canada about an 8-hour hand washing course that he had to replace, and I was very thankful to help him do that with microlearning experiences. Trish asks, do you evaluate results on level 1, 2, and 3 post microlearning compared to traditional methods? So we care less about levels 1, 2, and 3 than we do just about level 4 and whether people are transferring and actually changing their behavior. But certainly we look at engagement and to what extent people are actually completing their lessons, completing their assignments. It's really important for us to have those numbers be high because we want to capture and keep attention. And the key to that is having 5 to 10 minute short lessons. And we've built the platform to maximize on that kind of level 1 engagement, and then we focus otherwise on level 4. Brad asks, how can microlearning fit into a conference setting? This is a great question. I am in the process of changing my presentations, live presentations, to be much more like microlearning experiences. So I tried to do some of it today, but if you see me in the future, you might have a worksheet on your table, and you might have a presentation that's really about guiding you through doing the worksheet and practicing different micro behaviors that that are relevant to different parts of the worksheet, right? So in any given conference presentation, you should be able to break it down into a behavior and micro behaviors, and then take each one of those one at a time, and then get people to practice and collaborate in between. So that's an excellent question, and I hope more and more people actually start doing that, because I'm starting to get tired of the typical conference presentation, as most of us are, I think. Srinivas asks, is there a specific format that works well in microlearning? Yeah, so definitely check out the book. We talked about different media formats, whether you're using video, text, audio, GIFs, all of those things are great. But the key is to try to mix things up to continually capture people's attention, because people will start to get bored with and stop paying attention to the same format over and over and over again. Abby asks, how can microlearning best be complemented with in-person and other learning modes? So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but one great way to take a blended approach is to have a microlearning experience that kind of builds the fundamentals of a microbehavior. Then you get people to practice that in a workshop setting, in a live setting, and then you do reinforcement with some more microlearning after the fact. So it's kind of a flipped approach. TI asks, I'm not sure how to begin microlearning within my organization. Our training is typically 4 weeks at the shortest and so overwhelming as is. How do I adequately cover this much content using the microlearning approach? Well, I would say that you look at those 4 weeks and what happens, and try to focus those 4 weeks on different micro behaviors, as many as you can, right? So you might have, for example, 4 micro behaviors across the 4 weeks. 1 micro behavior per week. You can use that kind of sample flow that I laid out in this presentation, where on Monday you start with micro behavior 1 and continue and so forth. Or you can spend a whole week on an entire behavior. That's another option. So you can definitely take that 1 month and chop it down into short focused bursts of learning and still fulfill the requirements of the organization. And at the same time get a lot more results, because you focus on a lot more little actions than you would have otherwise. I have time for 2 more questions. Lindsay asks, what's the criteria for content or interactivity to reinforce or create behavior change? So this is kind of the whole ball game, and it's going to take a lot of different things. So it takes making the lesson focused on a behavior, giving people examples that they can model on and then practice. It's about giving them a call to action at the end so that they remember to actually apply what they've just learned. So that helps create some of that initial change in behavior. It means reinforcing these things and doing kind of daily learning and spacing it out over time, so people potentially at the same time, so people start creating habits around this behavior, because they know, every day at noon for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to learn for 5 to 10 minutes and practice this thing. You start to build some of those habit loops. So definitely it takes a lot of different things to coordinate that behavior change, but that's got to be our goal, right? That's got to be our focus. Okay, let's have one last question from Quentin. How do you deliver the learning to the learner, or how do you store it where you can find it when they need that knowledge? Well, Quentin, I just got to say, use Grovo, man. That's the way to do it. That's one option for you. There might be some other platforms available to you that help with push and pull. You can try to create effective microlearning experiences and put them into a typical LMS. Grovo happens to be built specifically for these kinds of microlearning experiences, so you might find it to be easier. Okay, we have a bunch of other questions that you guys submitted. Please, if I have not gotten to your question, email me at alex@grovo.com. Look out for the book which is coming out to you and the recording of this webinar. I am continually tweeting and blogging about my own journey with microlearning, so please follow me there. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Give some feedback right now if you're stuck around on how you thought this webinar went, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.